consent that the chair be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. As a reminder, I'd ask you to please keep your microphones muted unless you're speaking. Should I hear any inadvertent noise, I'll request that the member please mute their microphones. To insert a document into the record, please have your staff email it to documentstni@mail.house.gov. Today, in this hearing, we're going to examine the priorities for the coming fiscal year for the Federal Emergency Management Agency that I'll refer to as FEMA going forward, and hear from the administrator, Deanne Criswell, the administration or the agency's first female leader. And thank you very much for being here, and congratulations. I look forward to hearing how Administrator Criswell and her team plan to convert the priorities of President Biden's fiscal year 2022 budget into measurable improvements in FEMA's administration of emergency assistance, disaster relief, mitigation, and resilience. In March of last year, we held a similar hearing with former Administrator Gaynor. This was 2 days before President Trump invoked the Stafford Act to grant emergency declarations to each state and territory to provide assistance to combat the COVID-19 pandemic as it quickly spread across the country. At that time, I don't think any of us could have imagined FEMA would be tapped just a month later to plan and conduct an airlift in coordination with the Department of Defense and the private sector to bring staggering volumes of personal protective equipment from all over the world into this country. Since that time, FEMA has helped multiple states utilize, tragically, refrigerated tractor trailers to serve as makeshift mortuaries, and has set up the Lost Wages Assistance Program to provide additional jobless aid to those impacted by the pandemic's economic impact. At the same time, they were dealing with record-setting hurricane and wildfire seasons and processing an unprecedented number of reimbursement requests from eligible grantees and sub-grantees. In fact, the statistics show that there were more unique requesters in the last year alone than there were in the agency's first 4 decades of existence. You can imagine how overwhelming that must have been. And these are just the most immediate issues that Administrator Criswell will be tasked with having to address and get us through. While the agency's accomplished a lot since March 2020, including helping state, local, tribal, and territorial partners fully vaccinate more than 150 million Americans, and that was just in the last 6 months. Many of the problems that deserve FEMA's attention were pre-pandemic, and so we must not forget about addressing those now as well. Fortunately, the administrator is no stranger to FEMA, nor to being challenged shortly after stepping into a new leadership role. What an impressive resume she has. She served with distinction at FEMA as a federal coordinating officer and at the lead for one of the agency's elite national incident management assistant teams. Just days after taking the helm of New York City's emergency management, a blackout struck Manhattan, stranding hundreds of elevators and subways and wreaking havoc over a large part of the island. That must have, I cannot even imagine if those were my constituents calling me from a locked-in elevator. We look forward to hearing from you based on that experience and your talent and your knowledge. I don't expect you to have solved all of the challenges in just your first 8 weeks leading FEMA, but we're hopeful that we can learn more about your plans to address the foundational challenges facing FEMA. Some of those are adjudicating the backlog of reimbursements due to states and local governments under the Public Assistance Program, tackling the inequities of the Individual Assistance Program, recruiting and retaining a qualified, compassionate, and competent disaster workforce to provide timely aid, allocating resources to better invest in mitigation and resilience before danger strikes our communities, so they'll be able to get back up on their feet faster and with less expense following a disaster. We must build back better, not make the same mistakes of the past, even if it seems like it would be quicker or cheaper in the short run. I expect we'll touch on many of these tasks during today's hearings, and we'll learn how the President's budget request will contribute to some of those challenges we see facing the agency. I'll close by saying we recognize the challenges you face, Administrator Criswell, and we are here because we want you to be successful in that job. And we also want to hear from you so we can ensure that you have the resources and authorities that you need to get the job done and done right for survivors and their impacted communities. So thank you very much, and I'll now recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Titus, and thank you to the new FEMA Administrator, Criswell, for being here today. FEMA has a critical mission in our nation, and especially in my home state, Florida. FEMA leads the federal government's response to disasters, natural and man-made. While hurricanes, floods, wildfires, tornadoes, things like that, those disasters are more common. FEMA also manages the response to man-made disasters. Additionally, as we have seen with COVID-19, FEMA has an important role in responding to pandemics. This all hazards approach is critical to ensuring that we are prepared and the chain of command and the federal level is clear, effective, and efficient. Following problems in the federal government's response to Hurricane Katrina, Congress fixed key issues. Prior to Katrina, DHS had dispersed FEMA authorities throughout the department and put multiple people in charge. This created confusion with no clear chain of command. Post-Katrina Act put FEMA back together again, and while maintaining FEMA within DHS, ensured that it's FEMA's administrator, the emergency management expert, leading the federal response. This provides a clear chain of command up to the administrator and then directly to the president. Since the reforms of post-Katrina Act, we have passed reforms to streamline and recover process and invest more in mitigation and resiliency. There's been some progress, however. At times it seems like after Congress removes red tape, there's more red tape. Time costs money. The longer it takes communities to rebuild, the higher the cost to both the communities and to the federal taxpayer. For example, in the Sandy Recovery Improvement Act, we created Section 428 of the Stafford Act, which intended to give states a choice for a streamlined, faster process or to use the old paperwork way. 428 authority was extended to speed up the process by basing assistance on certified cost estimates. The idea was to reduce costs by shortening the rebuilding time, cutting administrative costs, and arriving at a more definitive dollar amount for a project faster. Yet by many accounts, the 428 process is looking more and more like the old. Similarly, on the individual assistance side, GOA detailed how confusing FEMA's process can be for individuals and families who want to navigate the process. Communities hit by disaster should not have to deal with bureaucratic red tape when they are trying to rebuild their lives. Ultimately, making it more difficult to assess assistance will not reduce the rise in the disaster costs. It may actually, won't reduce it, it may actually increase it. Proposals to tinker around the edges, like making it more difficult for disaster declarations or creating more red tape, do little to reduce the disaster costs and harm individuals and communities. Reality is that only a quarter of the disasters make up about 90% of the cost. It's the big disasters that drive the cost, and we know The proven way to reduce future administrative costs or disaster costs is to invest in mitigation. And study after study has shown that $1 of investment in mitigation can save $4 to $11 in disaster recovery costs. In Florida, we have seen these benefits firsthand, frequently by building smarter, investing by improving mitigation strategies. This is why, on a bipartisan basis, in the Recovery Act, Reform Act, we authorize up to 6% of disaster costs out of disaster relief fund to be used in a pre-disaster mitigation. Unfortunately, FEMA has only set aside a portion of that money that's available. The solution is helping communities recover and reducing future costs. Simply put, the recovery process for small disasters to reduce administrative costs and allow federal and state resources to focus on the large, more complex disasters. Second, the larger disasters leverage flexibilities in the law and close out projects faster. Third, maximizing investment is proven mitigation measures. FEMA already has many tools and legal authorities to achieve these goals. To make meaningful progress in the areas, it has come to the top of the, come from the top down within FEMA. I look forward to working with you and closely on these and other issues. I believe we can all work together to finally make a difference in how to prepare for recovery of disasters. I look forward to hearing your testimony. Thank you, Chair Titus. I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Webster. I now recognize Mr. DeFazio, who is the chairman of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister Criswell, for testifying here today. As I reminded your predecessor, Administrator Gaynor, our committee has jurisdiction over all of FEMA's Stafford Act responsibilities, which obviously are vast and of extraordinary importance and growing importance with the disasters invoked by climate change. So I want to, you've got a big job ahead. You bring good credentials to the job, but I've got to say there's a lot of work to do. Having heard from members representing devastated areas in previous disasters, and myself last year with the extraordinary fires here in Oregon, including in my district. It looks like I'm frozen up here. Hopefully this is coming through well. I'm in my office and I don't know what's with the Wi-Fi. But one of the connect somewhere in the public assistance pipeline, where bureaucracy seems to stifle the efforts on the ground. Many of the FEMA folks I've met on the ground are doing an extraordinary job and trying to help those who've been impacted. But somewhere further up the food chain and the bureaucracy, things get messy or delayed. I experienced that personally here in Oregon, and particularly not in my district, but in the district south of mine, with assistance programs that were very, very slowly implemented. So there's a lot of concern about the logjam in the public assistance pipeline. The agency is, you've got a lot of eligible, worksheets to work on. I mean, there's a whole glut of them, but the pace at which they're being adjudicated is daunting, maddening, and very, very much a hardship for the applicants. But despite the backlog, I'm glad we're able to ensure the agency had resources necessary to provide assistance. Worked hard on CARES, end of the year 21 omnibus, and this year's American Rescue Plan. The only two times I can recall Congress allocating FEMA more and as quickly was after 9/11 and the 2005 hurricane system with Katrina, Rita, and Wilmer. And you know, the share of FEMA's assistance overall, you know, is for disaster is infinitesimal compared to public assistance, yet individual assistance is seemingly bureaucratic and even more exasperating. You got a letter from, which for me, Chair Titus, Ranking Member Graves, and Ranking Member Webster regarding confusion even for basic determinations of eligibility for individual assistance and the drastic differences which have now been noted between survivors' individual assistance awards for very similar types of damage in the same disaster. So you know there's a problem, you know, and it's pretty much a black box to us. And I hope we'll get some more insight into that today and in the future. We can't get details, you know, for things as simple as full lists of questions posed to survivors, copies of form letters used by the agency to communicate throughout the process. You know, sure, I want to prevent fraud, but there's got to be a way to balance between the widespread fraud after '05 and where we are today. And, you know, when survivors have lost virtually everything, you know, it's, they shouldn't have to go through such a torturous process. You know, I appreciate that you've discussed within the agency the importance of ensuring more equity for survivors and within FEMA and their workforce itself. And you know, I want to know more about how you're going to improve in those areas. And then finally, one more priority of the committee is, as was mentioned by both who spoke before me, the pre-disaster mitigation. We're all very proud of what we did on a very bipartisan basis in the DRRA Disaster Recovery Reform Act in '18. And, you know, we were pleased to hear about the upcoming notice of funding opportunity for building resilient infrastructure and communities program, doubling it from 500 to $1 billion. It's a great step. But last year, the interest in the BRIC funding outstripped available resources by $3 billion. So this is another area where the chairs and ranking members sent a letter to your predecessor based on the calculations of disaster relief during the first 6 months of the pandemic. FEMA should have placed $3.2 billion into the pre-disaster mitigation set aside. Instead, the Trump administration only set aside $500 million. So that means there's yet another $1.7 billion in authority you have to commit to pre-disaster mitigation from the COVID declarations alone, which could result in, at a minimum, by calculations that are well documented, a 4-to-1 return. And you know, we will look for any way we can to provide additional funding for these cost-effective investments so we can achieve our shared goal of building a more disaster resilient nation. Later in questions, I'll bring up concerns I have about coordination between SBA, HUD, and FEMA in the hope that we can deal with that morass into which many people fall. So thanks again for your testimony, your time, and the expertise you bring to this agency. You have massive challenges ahead. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The ranking chair of the full committee is not here today, so we'll move on to hear from our witness. I'd like to welcome you again. Our witness is the Honorable Deanne Criswell, who is Administrator of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Thank you very much for being with us here today. We all look forward to hearing from you. Without objection, our witness's full statement will be included in the record. Since your witness testimony has been made a part of the record, the committee would request that you limit your oral testimony to 5 minutes. So, Administrator Criswell, the floor is yours. Please proceed.
All right, thank you, Chair Titus. Just real fast for a sound check to make sure you can hear me.
We can hear you. You look and sound good.
Okay, great. Chair Titus, Ranking Member Webster, and members of the subcommittee, I'm delighted to appear before you today to discuss the President's budget request for FEMA in fiscal year 2022 and to describe how the President's vision guides my priorities for the agency. FEMA's mission of supporting people before, during, and after disasters has never been more critical than we see right now. Our role during the COVID-19 pandemic response and numerous other active disasters attests to the vital importance and responsibility of this agency to our nation. Given FEMA's unprecedented mission requirements, the President's budget increases the FEMA budget to $28.4 billion. This is $1.9 billion more than fiscal year 2021 enactment. The President's budget, if enacted, will allow FEMA to meet the challenges we face ahead. In my first months as the FEMA administrator, I am focused on three key priorities: supporting the FEMA workforce and our readiness, integrating equity into everything we do, and addressing climate change through risk reduction. I will describe these priorities in turn. First, we must support the FEMA workforce and our readiness. To protect the well-being of our workforce and the communities we serve in a COVID-19 environment, we continue to rely on virtual operations where appropriate. We are evaluating how to enhance our operational capacity, promote an agile and expeditionary culture, and support the safe return to the office. Workforce readiness begins with the right staffing levels. The fiscal year 2022 budget supports increased hiring and, among other things, would result in a 14% increase in the number of our Stafford Act employees. Readiness also means ensuring the workforce has the training, tools, and resources they need to do their job, and I am committed to providing that to my workforce. Longer term, we also need to professionalize the field of emergency management by better defining what it means to be an emergency manager and building career paths for the nation's emergency management workforce. Second, we must integrate equity into everything we do. The nation deserves to have our programs and services delivered fairly and equitably. To meet this expectation, diversity, equity, and inclusion must be core components of how we conduct ourselves and execute our mission. FEMA is currently soliciting feedback from the public and our partners to ensure we understand how our programs impact survivors of different demographics, and where needed, we are committed to making changes. This includes changes to our policies, procedures, and how we deploy and execute our mission. Internally, this means building a diverse and inclusive workforce, which resembles the communities that we serve. Externally, it means we must proactively identify and reach out to underserved communities and populations most in need of our help. We are analyzing our operational programs through the lens of equity, and we are doing that for a reason. We know that disasters exacerbate existing inequalities, and we need to ensure FEMA assistance reaches everyone who needs it. We must also identify the root causes of differing recovery outcomes for survivors and work aggressively and collectively to ensure access for all disaster response and recovery assistance. FEMA's commitment to equity is evident in our efforts to advance the accessibility of COVID-19 vaccines. At the President's direction, FEMA coordinated with federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial partners to support the establishment and expansion of over 2,100 community vaccination centers. This included 39 federally led CVC pilot sites and the deployment of 18 mobile vaccination units to help reach traditionally underserved and remote communities. Nearly 60% of all of the doses administered at the federally led pilot CVCs went to communities of color. As we continue to execute our response to COVID-19 and other disasters, FEMA will also continue to prioritize equity across all of our operations. Finally, we must address climate change through risk reduction. As emergency managers, we must face the challenges that climate change poses to our mission head on and make generational level investments to reduce these impacts. As a former firefighter in Colorado, I understand the benefits of mitigation. Developing resilient communities ahead of an incident reduces both the loss of life and economic disruption. Every dollar invested in mitigation saves the American taxpayer $6 in future spending. To provide local partners with financial support for mitigation projects, FEMA is expanding resources and technical assistance for the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities program, which establishes a reliable stream of funding for larger mitigation projects through a nationwide grant program. Recently, the president visited FEMA and announced that he was doubling the funding available for the BRIC program to $1 billion for the fiscal year 2021 application period. Mitigating the increasing flood risk is particularly important as flooding is the most common and costly natural disaster in the United States. Among other initiatives, the president's fiscal year 2022 budget requests more than $428 million for the flood hazard mapping and risk analysis program to allow for more climate change data to be incorporated into flood risk analysis. FEMA is also working to ensure that communities are protected financially from flooding. FEMA is updating the National Flood Insurance Program pricing methodology to fix long-standing inequities by more closely aligning insurance premiums to the specific flood risk of each home. The fiscal year 22 budget also includes a means-tested affordability proposal to ensure that everyone who needs flood insurance can afford it. In conclusion, the COVID-19 pandemic is an important turning point for our country and challenges us to rethink our systems, decisions, and investments. This past year has not been easy, and I would like to recognize the professionalism and perseverance demonstrated by the FEMA workforce. I look forward to working with the members of this subcommittee as we build a more ready and resilient nation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Now I recognize Chairman DeFazio for his first questions. Sorry, we can't hear you.
All right. And I'm there. Okay, sorry. You mentioned your firefighting background, and that's going to be critical in the coming summer. We're having what might turn out to be the hottest week over the Greater West in history. I mean, we're not anywhere near August yet, and we were already in record drought. So this is going to be extraordinary. And I'm just wondering if you think that our pre and post disaster funding has historically, just because the severe wildfires are a more recent occurrence, slanted toward wind and flood events, hurricanes and the like, and whether we need to rethink those priorities in pre-disaster.
Yes, it's a really timely question as we talk about the hazard mitigation funding that we have available through BRIC, but we also have several other hazard mitigation programs. I mean, I think an important point to note is we, in recent years, have enacted hazard mitigation funding after an FMAG, a fire management assistance grant, has been given to do additional hazard mitigation that's specific to those communities that were impacted by the fire. This program allows us to rebuild and help those communities that were specifically impacted. But I think on a larger note, the grant program that we have available, or the various grant programs that we have available, it's the state and local jurisdictions that submit for the projects that they want to conduct within their communities. And I think where FEMA can help play a part in that is really help educating communities that this funding is available to also support wildland mitigation efforts, which to date, only a small percentage of the grants submitted are submitted for wildland fire mitigation. And so I think as a nation, we have work to do to make sure everybody understands the magnitude and scope that this program can cover, and that we help people understand the types of system-wide mitigation that can now be done through this increased level of funding.
Excellent. Yes, I think a new program of outreach is warranted. In many cases, we're dealing with relatively unpopulated counties, small jurisdictions, and there's not a lot of expertise there. So that would be very welcome. How about the issue I raised at the beginning? Simplifying the language used in correspondence. And the notifications for status of applications, and then some kind of coordination. I mean, is it possible? I know bureaucracies are difficult to have a universal application between HUD, SBA, and FEMA, and is that something you're envisioning working on?
I think that the points you raised really demonstrate that recovery from these disasters is really complex. And there are several programs that are out there that do support the long-term recovery of communities and for individuals. I understand the frustration. I recently came from the local level, and while it may be a major urban center, it was also difficult to navigate sometimes the federal bureaucracy. I think that right now we can do a better job of trying to make sure that our programs are more accessible and easily accessible for individuals so they know what to ask for and what they would be eligible for. But from the long-term recovery standpoint, we have recovery coordinators that do work with communities to help bring all of the various programs together. But I think as we talk about the fact that these disasters are becoming more complex and we are having to bring in more programs to rebuild, really emphasizes the point that we need to also be taking a different approach. And as all of you have stated, investing in mitigation upfront so we reduce those impacts and so we don't have to rely on so many programs for recovery.
Okay. Again, we may want to revisit my idea about universal application, and I'd be happy to work with the other committees of jurisdiction. But finally, we've been looking for a national rule of reasonable and prudent alternatives under the National Fund Insurance Program for ESA compliance, given some perverse court rulings on this. And I want to know when we can expect to have that rule published, because the alternative is we're going to have litigation in myriad states by various groups regarding the NFIP program and noncompliance with ESA for whatever species exist in those states. I think we really have to move on to a national rule. Do you have a timeline on that?
I don't have the specifics on where we are at with that program, Representative, but certainly I will get with my team and we will get back to you with the status and what the timeline looks like.
Okay, thank you. That'd be fabulous, because this has been dragging on for far too long. I mean, the litigation was back under the Obama administration. Granted, there probably wasn't much progress under the last administration on this issue, but anyway, that'd be great. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes a ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. FEMA has played a critical, I might say from my own experience, a very effective leadership position and leadership role in response to COVID-19. Are you is FEMA looking at sort of the lessons learned of success and failure or whatever during this time? And if what, are you making recommendations for, hopefully not, but the pandemic of the future?
Representative Webster, we've learned so much as a nation from the response to COVID-19. And I learned a great deal during my time in New York City. And when I came here, worked with my team to see where we were at really discovering, what we as an agency learned and how we implemented our programs differently. And we did find that there are ways that we can administer our programs more remotely, more efficiently through the use of technology. And that's one of the things that we are now looking at, how we can institutionalize that into the way we deliver programs for the future. I think that we have such a great opportunity in front of us right now to capitalize on how we learn to do things better and differently that I believe will really make a difference in reaching out to more underserved communities and being able to bring assistance to the people where they're at instead of making them come to FEMA to get their help.
Awesome. Florida, the state of Florida, has two problems related to each other, both of them related to time. And I would suspect there are others who have the same problem. In one case, we need more time. In another case, we need less time. At least in my area, the FEMA has set, at least in sometimes it's set an amount of time, 30-day deadline to get cost estimates in to the damage that has happened. So the storms happened, the winds came, or if it was a hurricane or something, then it leaves, and now we got 30 days to come up with a cost estimate. On the other hand, for our area, after that happens, 30 days is just when it's probably subsiding, and maybe just 3 or 4 days before that, the flooding from the rivers has peaked because of the flow of the water comes downstream, and this rolling crest that's coming down floods the area again, and so we can't make the estimates needed. So that's sort of we need a little bit more time because it's just the way it works, at least in some areas for some things. Secondly, though, we need less time. We need sometimes our states, especially the small cities and counties that don't have a surplus, they don't have a sort of a slush fund or anything else to balance their needs. They get by from kind of like paycheck to paycheck. And so those counties and cities who do that need less time for FEMA to pony up the money that they need. I was thinking about several of them who waited maybe after a disaster over a year, maybe 2 years before they were able to get their money. It's not that they didn't get it, it's just the time in between, they have nothing to fill in the gaps. Lots of major cities, larger cities, they can do it. They can get by and things work out. And the time isn't as big a problem. But for us, I have a lot of small counties and cities. They need time shortened so that they could get those things taken care of. So I guess my question is, can you commit to help us out either, or if there's other tools you need in order to do that, can we provide them? Or is it you have enough tools, you just need to do it? That's my questions.
Thank you. You know, I appreciate the conversation you and I had the other day regarding this. And, you know, time, as you stated, is our most precious commodity. When it comes to response, we want to make sure that we're getting in there fast so we can save lives. When it comes to recovery, we want to make sure that we're getting people assistance, financial reimbursement soon so they can stay viable for their own staff. But you bring up the great point, as I've seen firsthand how long it can take for flooding to recede and actually get in there to do the assessments that are required. So I think that your point also really goes to, you know, my priority of equity, which is, you know, we want to be able to ensure that we're delivering our programs equitably across the nation and to provide for the needs of the communities that are impacted, which will all have their own specific and unique needs. So I am committed to having my team continue to dive into this subject and determine how we can better support communities, give them access to the programs that they need soon when they need it, and give them the time that they need to make sure that they can get all of the appropriate paperwork in place so they can get the reimbursement that they are eligible for.
Thank you very much. Look forward to working with you. Yield back.
Thank you. I'll now yield to myself. It's very refreshing to hear you speak so freely about the impacts of climate change, as opposed to erasing the term from the website like we saw happen some agencies under the last administration. You know, Nevada and the West are drier and hotter in recent years than ever, exacerbating the wildfire threats. Just last week, my district in Las Vegas experienced 5 straight days over 113 degrees and a couple at 117. Meanwhile, we're burning up. Other places are flooding. Riverside and coastal communities are dealing with the consequences of sea level rise, whether it's just regular tidal flooding on clear days or it's severe storm surges during the extreme weather, like the hurricanes that you're seeing in the southeast. Now, we already know, and as Chairman DeFazio pointed out, the demand is great for state, local, tribal, and territorial governments to invest in infrastructure projects to mitigate some of these known and predictable threats that arise from environmental changes. And we're seeing that reflected in the oversubscribed Building Resilience Infrastructure and Communities Program, or BRIC as we call it. Another place we're seeing it is in a program that this committee enacted last year with FEMA to seed state-managed revolving loan funds. This idea was introduced by our colleague, Representative Angie Craig, and it's based on very successful water state revolving funds. Those communities that have gotten tired of repeatedly applying and not being selected for some of the highly competitive grants can instead just choose to pursue projects on their own with a predictable path of paying it off. And I hope that FEMA will seek funds to seed those revolving funds in the next budget. But it's something we could do today is put aside more resources into pre-disaster mitigation. And I realize what the budget calls for, the request for $500 million for disaster relief funding and the 6% calculation for BRIC. But could you talk to us a little bit about how you see those two buckets coming together to help with this issue of the great demand and not very much resources?
Thank you for the question. I mean, we are, and I have seen personally the continuous increase in the number of natural disasters, the severity of these disasters, the frequency of these disasters, and I think more importantly, how rapidly they start to escalate now, more rapidly than we've seen them in the past, and that goes from wildfires to hurricanes in the Gulf. And this is a direct result of our changing climate. The best protection we have as we work to reduce the, and change the direction the climate is going, the best investment that we can do right now is through pre-disaster mitigation funding. And we have multiple different mitigation programs that can support this. The BRIC program, which I thank everybody here for your involvement in making this a reality. I think the importance of the BRIC program and how it relates to some of our other programs is we now have a continuous source of funding at a much higher level than we've had in the past, so we can make generational level investments in reducing risk. In our previous programs, the max grant, I believe, was $4 million federal share, and now we can go up to $50 million. This takes us away from the incremental way that we have been approaching hazard mitigation in the past and really shifts our focus to a system-wide approach. But what we need to do is really help communities think in this system-wide approach more so we can start to put these visionary projects that will not just have an impact for us now, but for our children and our grandchildren in the future. I think this type of generational level investment is going to be critical as we start to think about what the risks are going to be 10 years from now or 20 years from now as a result of our changing climate.
Well, I know that there's bipartisan support for expanding these kind of investment opportunities, and I wonder if you see any problems with increasing that budget from $1 billion?
Chair Titus, I don't see any issues for increasing that budget. FEMA has the ability to set aside 6% as a result of the DRRA, and we are committed to continuing a a baseline of funding at $500 million to help support these mitigation projects as we continue to build out and mature the BRIC program.
Okay. Well, thank you. We'd like to pursue that and see if we can't maybe encourage some greater investment. I'll now recognize Ms. Van Dyne.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Titus and Ranking Member Webster, for holding this hearing. FEMA plays an incredibly important role responding to natural disasters, but it also works side by side with numerous other agencies to fulfill its mission. When I was regional administrator for HUD during Hurricane Harvey, Maria, and Irma, I saw firsthand the bureaucratic web of red tape and inefficiencies that prevented getting help to those who needed it most in a timely manner. And I spoke with many of you in this body, who came to me fighting for your constituents and asking me why it was taking so long to get aid. And I felt and understood your frustration, but I had to explain the long list of policies, procedures, and red tape that our regulations demanded. And these inefficiencies have serious costs. The faster FEMA is able to get help to communities of need, the faster they can recover. And it's critically important that these agencies all work together. Now, I understand what's been said today about increasing funding, but I think it shouldn't be always about increasing the amount of funding, but about spending the allocated dollars in the most efficient way possible. And many of the rules for disaster recovery often make no sense. For example, FEMA can spend $500 to install a temporary water heater, but it can't spend more than $300 to repair the one that's there. So FEMA is unable to build a permanent structure when often the temporary is more expensive. Can you help me understand and just bring a little bit more common sense and tell me what kind of efficiencies and adjustments have you seen in your time at FEMA that could actually help in this manner?
I think that it's a great point. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's so much of our funding that is designed for long-term recovery, and we have so many different sources that can bring assistance to individuals. And I hear you. I hear that, sometimes the way the regulations are written, it takes the common sense out of the factor of how do we actually be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. I understand some of the struggles that we've had in the past, and we've been able to do some creative things through the Stafford Act, like the STEP program during the response to Hurricane Sandy in New York and New Jersey. And I believe we've done some other things. FEMA has done some other things over the past few years as well. But I have directed my team to take a look at it. How are we applying the intent of the Stafford Act, and do we need to make some regulatory changes so we can make sure that we are, one, being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar, but we're getting people on the road to the recovery sooner than having to wait for all of these programs to come together.
And I appreciate that. And by the way, I do want to give a shout out to Tony Robinson. He's your RA out in Region 6. I'd recommend talking to him and others who I have worked with that actually can help you direct the funds more efficiently. I've got another question. Since March, FEMA has been involved in setting up shelters at the border. Yesterday, I know that you met with President Biden. Was the ongoing discussion or the ongoing crisis at the border and FEMA's ongoing discussion, ongoing mission discussed? I know that Press Secretary Psaki was unable to answer if there was a deadline on the FEMA and whether or not you're going to be able to pull away from the border as we enter into our hurricane season?
No, thank you for asking that question. FEMA's role is to coordinate across the federal interagency. We're very good at that. And FEMA was brought in to support HHS and CBP as they were executing their mission to support the border. FEMA at no time, the max number of people that we had at the border was less than 100 at any given time. So only a small amount of our staff were involved in providing some technical assistance to that. But as HHS and CBP have continued to take over their roles in the program, we now have less than 14 people supporting this mission, and our staff is reset so they can get ready to support hurricane season.
Great, thank you very much. I've got one quick other question. I know we had a great relationship at HUD and FEMA and USDA and others that are working on disaster recovery, but sometimes we have like hard silos. that we see that we're unable to be able to cooperate in a manner that would make the most sense. So have you seen how to be able to build more of a unified front with some of the other agencies?
You know, I think as we talk about long-term recovery, that's what the intent of the National Disaster Recovery Framework was all about how do we build those relationships and bring all of the things that the federal government has to offer to the table, and to make sure that we're doing it in a collective way. So we're complementing each other's programs instead of working in individual silos. And so, you know, as we continue to look at how we're going to approach and refine the way we're doing business here at FEMA, given the new operational, things that we've learned from COVID-19, I think we have another opportunity to also talk about how we're doing that for long-term recovery, and can actually bring these programs together in a better way.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I yield back my time.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes Ms. Norton.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Administrator Criswell, I want to question you first on FEMA's role in the insurrection here at the U.S. Capitol. The reason I'm interested is I noted that FEMA has an Office of National Capital Region Coordination. Let me read to you what its mission is: to conduct preparedness, planning, and operational activities and provide leadership and coordination within the National Capital Region to synchronize and integrate the whole community in executing homeland security and emergency management activities. Administrator Criswell, what steps did FEMA take in general, and the Office of National Capital Region Coordination in particular, steps to prepare for and respond to the attack of January the 6th?
Thank you for that question. I observed the events of January 6th, not from Washington, D.C. I was in New York City at the time. And so I was away from the area as many Americans watched what happened that day. But I want to point out that FEMA is not a law enforcement agency. But as you stated, we do have a team, the National Capital Region Coordination Team, the National Capital Region Coordination, and they work every day with the district and the neighboring jurisdictions on preparedness activities. And in particularly, one of their roles is to work collectively with those Homeland Security and emergency management agencies across the region in preparation for national special security events. And so that team had done a number of preparedness efforts in advance of the inauguration. They had done a number of tabletop exercises, planning exercises, coordination meetings to talk specifically about what would happen at the inauguration if there was an event of civil unrest. And so
that's really my question. Now that we know what happened on January 6th, in what ways is FEMA prepared to respond to any future such attacks against the federal government in the nation's capital?
Yeah, again, I'd like to point out that FEMA is not a law enforcement agency. Our job is to work with our local jurisdictions and their preparedness efforts, make sure that they have the tools and the resources that they need in order to accomplish their mission.
You have an Office of Preparedness, Planning, and Operational Activities for the National Capital Region. That's the reason I'm asking this question.
Yes, ma'am. And it's that group that works with the local agencies to help in their capability and their preparedness efforts. Our role is to work with them, to do exercises with them, to assist in writing their plans as needed so they can execute it. But FEMA, again, is not a law enforcement agency and would not respond to such a situation.
I'm well aware of that. I'm just trying to make sure you're playing your role here in the National Capital Region. The Department of Defense failed to deploy the DC National Guard here for hours, and so FEMA is not uninvolved in all of this. Let me ask you a question about communities of color and low income and disabled people here around the country in the wake of national disasters, because these are the people who face more difficulties when applying for FEMA disaster assistance. Now, I note that the president has an executive order, that's President Biden, that commits the federal government to implementing a comprehensive approach, I was very pleased at that, to advancing equity for historically underserved and marginalized communities. Administrator Criswell, how do you plan to fulfill this administration's pledge of eradicating inequity in emergency planning?
Yes, through my previous experience, I have seen firsthand the disproportionate impact that our underserved communities face during a disaster. What I've seen is those communities that have a hard time during day-to-day life have an even harder time than once a disaster happens. And as I stated in my opening remarks, equity in how we deliver our programs is one of my top priorities as I come into this position. And so I have directed my team to really take a deep look at the barriers that people are facing in receiving assistance, but I think even more importantly is access to assistance. What we have seen and what we've been able to do during our support for the COVID-19 response is learning how important it is to get assistance to the people instead of having them and forcing them to come to us. And we were able to use data in a way that we've never been able to or didn't use before. And I think that's really going to be instrumental in how we change the delivery of our programs going forward to make sure that we can target and reach out to those communities we know are going to need assistance and maybe just don't have the means to access it as much as some other communities. And so, again, I've directed my team to take a look at what barriers that we're seeing. And we've also, and it's important to point out here, we've asked for input from the public. We've put out a request for information on our website asking the community, what struggles are you facing in receiving assistance from FEMA? And we're going to take that information as we continue this analysis of our delivery of programs and make improvements along the way. And that RFI, that request for information, is available for the communities to respond to until July 21st.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Jimenez?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the ranking member. Administrator Criswell, I represent the congressional district with probably the most national flood insurance policies in the country. In Miami-Dade and Monroe counties, which I represent, there are almost 400,000 NFIP policies. Obviously, the risk rating 2.0 is going to have a huge impact on my constituents, and I intend to watch the situation very closely. With that in mind, I'm concerned with the rollout of the plan. It all seems to be happening pretty quickly, and I don't think that any of my constituents who are policyholders understand what may happen to their rates. What does FEMA intend to do beyond simply working through the insurance industry to educate and inform policyholders about their rates? And more importantly, what else can FEMA do to help people learn about the mitigation options available to them to help them reduce their rates if they're going to go up significantly under the new rate structure? And it looks like it will. And some of my constituents that weren't, that never had to buy flood insurance are now going to be faced with buying flood insurance for the first time at a significant rate. So what can you do to help?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Risk rating 2.0 has been in the works for several years, and FEMA has worked with industry experts to really look at how we were providing rates and establishing rates for individuals. And what we found is that the risk calculations themselves were not specific and unique to the individual's risk. And so what risk rating 2.0 does is it really creates an equitable distribution of the risk that's out there. And so homeowners that don't have as much risk, their rates are actually going to go down. But they've been subsidizing the risk for some of the individual homeowners that have a higher risk. And so the program itself, I believe it's about 2/3 of the program, their rates are either going to go down or the increase in the rate is going to be no more than what they experience on a year-to-year basis right now. I hear you on the ability to make sure that we're doing enough education and outreach to make sure people understand what their rates are going to be. The rollout of the program for phase 1 is that any new policies that are put in place by October 1st, they're going to be subject to the new risk rating methodology, but also beginning October 1st, any individuals that their rates are going to go down, their rates will go down starting October 1st. But for those policyholders that need to renew their rates, or if their rates are going to go up, or renew their policies or rates are going to go up, that's not going to happen until April 1st of next year. And I'll commit to you that I'll make sure that my team is doing the appropriate level of outreach and education so homeowners understand what their impacts are going to be and how they can get better prepared for that.
The statement that you said about the rates going up and down, that's on a nationwide level, right? It's not really in Monroe County, which is really the county that I'm most about. Okay, all right, thank you. The second question I have is, and I appreciate the administration's, recent focus on the building a resilient infrastructure and communities pre-disaster mitigation grant program, and I really applaud Congress for creating it. Monroe County, again, that's the Keys, which makes up the Florida Keys, requested funding from the BRIC program for the Twin Lake project in my district. But Twin Lakes and another community in the Keys, Stillwright Point, are ground zero for sea level rise and sea level rise concerns. And they really need FEMA's urgent attention through the BRIC program. Situation so dire that the New York Times back in November of 2019 featured both communities and that they had lived through 82 straight days of flooding in their streets due to sea level rise. Will you please join me in my districts to visit these communities that are really the point of the spear for sea level rise and work with the county, the constituents, and me to help devise a plan to improve the situation there through the BRIC or other programs?
Congressman, yes, I mean, I think it's a true example of how this community-wide mitigation that's now available through the BRIC program can make real differences across the community. And so I would be happy to meet with you and your constituents to get a better understanding of what their challenges are.
Well, thank you. By the way, that's in the key, so it's really not a bad trip. Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield my time back.
Thank you. Maybe we should all go down there on a field trip for this committee. Ms. Napolitano?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Criswell, it's great to see you here. I have three points that I'd like to make. First is the strategic goal that you named to reduce complexity. Many constituents in my area were struggling to identify and access funeral assistance, and would like to know what efforts you make to improve outreach and accessibility. Second question, the $1 billion President Biden has included for FEMA's budget, rebuilding resilient infrastructure and community program, doubling the funding available to help cities and states prepare for extreme weather disasters. In instances like Puerto Rico, can we make sure that the infrastructure policy is changed to allow rebuilding to modern infrastructure, not to the same old, to withstand rather frequent hurricanes or emergencies? And then to the same question, how will FEMA prioritize communities' requests for pre-disaster mitigation funding? And will the communities be able to take precedence over them? The third item was a New York Times article on June the 7th, found FEMA looking at racial disparities. Have you identified, and how are you sharing your findings and changes with local government?
Okay, I think I have all of them. So I'm going to start out with funeral assistance, Representative Napolitano. You know, again, I spent the most challenging year of my life in New York City last year and saw the devastating impacts that communities were feeling by the loss of loved ones. And I think all of us here have been touched by that in some way or another. And FEMA was able to implement the funeral assistance program in a way that we've never been able to do before, on a scale that is much bigger than what we've done in the past. To date, we've given out over $400 million already in funeral assistance to individuals that experienced this loss. And we continue to do outreach with communities to make sure that they understand that this program is available for them, and also making sure that we back to the access issue, that those that need the access to the program have access and they know how to apply for assistance. And so working through our regional administrators as they work with their state directors, we are making sure that we're trying to get that information out to everybody so they know that this assistance is out there. It doesn't mitigate their loss, but it does help take away some of the stress that they were feeling from that loss.
And reduce the red tape, reduction of
Yeah.
the red tape involved.
Yes, I think right now our average award is taking less than 25 days from the time a person submits an application for funeral assistance until the time they get their reimbursement.
Thank you.
And then on your second point on mitigation and PDMG, you know, it's I think that you make a great point. We don't want to build back our infrastructure to the way it was before. We want to build back stronger so we can reduce the impacts from future disasters. And we do that in a couple of ways, right? As communities have declared disasters and they get public assistance funding to repair their projects, they can also repair to a higher level through that program already. But then also after disasters, we give out hazard mitigation grants to the state or the territory that they can also use, not just for those specific projects, but to talk about mitigation efforts across their communities to help, again, increase their own resilience to future events. And then with the
Well, in Puerto Rico, I was told they were building back to the old type site, to the old type of infrastructure. And I found that very disturbing.
Yes, you know, and I think FEMA provides the funding, but we don't provide authority to direct them to build back to a different level. But we work and
No, it
encourage.
was the agency decision, not the community.
So again, FEMA does not have the authority to tell communities how to build, but we do work with them to let them know what their possibilities are, so they can use the funding to the most effective way possible and try to build back better, build back stronger. And so we work with them and encourage them and give them guidance and advice as they're going through the process as to what they are eligible to do. But the local jurisdictions will ultimately make the final decision on how they're going to repair their own infrastructure. And then on your last point, ma'am, on the New York Times story, again, I've seen firsthand the disproportionate impacts that the communities of color experience. And this was never more apparent than during my time in New York City, when I watched how the communities across New York City, the underserved communities, were having much greater impacts than other parts of the city. And again, equity is one of my top priorities as we continue to look at how we deliver our programs. It's partly because of access, and we want to make sure that people have access to programs. And we have seen through some of these stories that have come out that our programs don't always reach everybody that it needs to reach, and that's not okay. And I'm committed, and my team is working on trying to, again, figure out and identify what these barriers to access are so we can get the assistance to those people that need it most.
Thank you very much, thank you for the indulgence, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Graves, we are always glad to have you sit with us on this committee, but we're wondering why you don't just get assigned here so you can also have a vote as well as a voice.
Madam Chair, thank you. I'd urge you to talk to our ranking member about that. Administrator, thank you for joining us today, and congratulations to you The good news is you get to head up FEMA. The bad news is you get to inherit everything that's happened before you, which is what I want to talk to you about a little bit. First of all, I want to associate myself with the chairman's comments about, and really reiterating what you said about the 6-to-1 return on investment, and of course other statistics showing it's even higher. I represent South Louisiana, and no better place to prove the importance and the value of making proactive investments. The PDM program, the BRIC program, hazard mitigation, all of them are critical programs that can lead to more resilient communities and ecosystems, but they're not going to work if they're not fully funded, and they're not going to work if they're siloed. This committee also has jurisdiction over the Corps of Engineers. In many cases, we found that we're unable to use FEMA funds for these Corps of Engineer projects that are unfunded whenever those projects are the highest priority in the community. We fixed part of that in the DARA bill, but we still have more work to do and would love to work with you on that. First issue I'd like to bring up is school reimbursements. In 2016, we had a 1,000-year flood, perhaps. East Baton Rouge Parish has only had, or has 29 of their 40 outstanding reimbursements outstanding and waiting on FEMA for PW amendments right now. This represents millions of dollars. This is a school district, directly impacts the kids. Obviously not going to jump into the details with you right now, but I would like a commitment from you that you will put someone on this to full resolution. This is really important, and it is impacting the school district's operations.
Yes, Representative Graves. I just recently visited Louisiana last week and was impressed with the meetings that I had. And to your comment on the school districts, we need to help these communities recover. And if we don't get that funding and get them on the road to recovery, then they're just more vulnerable to the next disaster. And so, yes, you have my commitment to working with you and your team to make sure that we get these projects moving.
Okay, I'm going to say it again. 29 of the 40 reimbursements are outstanding. And when you slip that note to your staff, if you could also add Terrebonne Parish and St. Charles Parish that have project worksheets from Hurricane Katrina and Rita in 2005 and Hurricane Gustav in 2008, totaling millions of dollars. So St. Charles, Terrebonne, and East Baton Rouge parishes, please. Next issue I'd like to bring up is one of the great bipartisan bills we did. I referenced earlier, DARA. I think it made some really important reforms to FEMA, begin this paradigm shift from a reactive agency to a proactive one. We still have more work to do, but one of the things we did in terms of value to taxpayers is we said that if a local government entity can implement a housing solution that is 50% of the cost or less than the comparable FEMA housing solution, then that local government can carry it out and get reimbursed. I want to thank FEMA for their work with our Livingston Parish Sheriff's Office that saved millions of dollars for federal taxpayers. Now, with all the hurricanes you visited in Southwest Louisiana recently, the sheriffs there are being told this is not a Stafford-eligible expense. All I can say is that is completely bull. That we amended Stafford with DARA, that you all have done it once already with the Livingston Parish Sheriffs. And look, if you want to stand in front of a microphone and tell the public that you think it's better for federal taxpayers to pay twice as much or more for a solution, you can have at it. I'm not playing any role in that, and I just really appreciate you bringing some common sense to this issue to where we don't have to re-legislate on this, because that's pretty frustrating.
Yeah, I understand and appreciate your frustration with that. I think that sometimes our legislation and our statutes take some of the common sense out, but I think FEMA has demonstrated that we can put the common sense back in, as you stated, and my team is working through some of the issues that you have just brought up, so we can figure out how to do this better going forward.
Thank you. Two other things we put on y'all's radar screen. We did two provisions, one related to evacuation route performance, and the other one related to inundated roads, that we did provisions in DARA. FEMA effectively issued guidance that says the same damn thing as they did before. We wouldn't have changed the law if that was our intent. Evacuation routes are not performing in a hurricane, for example. That indicates the standards are inappropriate. We need those standards updated in my community, in Mr. Rausers, in Mr. Webster's, these hurricane-prone areas. We can't have our main evacuation routes like interstates that are underwater. Ours, I-12, in the 2016 flood was under 6 feet of water. As I recall, somewhere over 1,200 motorists stranded on the interstate that became victims that we had to then go fly food and water to and things like that. It diverted our emergency resources in that disaster, and I'd like to ask you to look at those two things, please. Lastly, Madam Chair, I just want to reiterate the comments made by the mayor about risk rating 2.0. Very strong concerns. We absolutely want fairness. We want risk conveyed, but very, very concerned about how that's moving forward. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Garamendi?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Graves has brought up a series of issues, but before I get to them, congratulations. Look forward to working with you. We've got a whole host of us here that know how the department, how FEMA could be run better. If we were so good at it, we would have sought the appointment. But we're wise. We know that it is a thankless job because there's always more to be done. We wish you well. We may from time to time browbeat you, but we know that you've got a very difficult situation, and it's almost always done in a situation at a time when people are traumatized and in need of great help. So now, having set the stage for being nice, let me jump on along with everybody else. This is just one more example of the work that I know you want to do and will do, and that is trying to make it more feasible for people to get the assistance they need. During the height of the pandemic, the food lines stretched for miles, and the FEMA regulations were written in such a way as a lot of the opportunity to provide food using FEMA's authorization and money didn't happen because of a regulation or a practice that basically said that if there was another federal source, then FEMA would not participate. And of course, the Department of Agriculture was already there. I would ask you just to take a look at that as one of many examples within your agency that the rules really get in the way of providing the relief that people really need. So I'll let that one just hang out there. What answer would you have besides, yeah, we need to look at it? And I suspect you will now that I've mentioned it. There's another issue. The issue of small counties was brought up by the chairman, DeFazio, but he didn't bring up a piece that I thought he would get to, and that is the 428 program. It's an alternative procedure that counties can use. Many of the small counties, when they are doing their recovery programs, have to front the money. They simply don't have the money to front it. Often the damage is in the multi-millions, and their budgets may just be in the single millions. And so they are unable to carry out the mitigation and the disaster recovery. The 428 program allows FEMA to front the money. And my question to you is, are you aware of this problem? If not, well, I just brought it up to you. If you could take a look at the smaller rural counties and how FEMA can assist these counties by making full use of the 428, Section 428, alternative procedures under the Recovery Act. So if you could take a look at that, the next time we have a small county disaster, which will probably be anytime in the near future, if you would please help the counties by pushing that money forward under the alternative procedures. And I've got a minute. Once again, I think I've covered it already. It's the cash flow problem that the small counties have. Ms. Griswold, I've been talking. You've not had a chance to say, yes, we'll get on it. Would you like to do so?
Congressman, I'm familiar with the 428 program slightly. It was something that was put in place towards the end of my previous time here at FEMA, but it is designed to help expedite the projects and get get the projects moving faster. I'm not familiar with the cash flow piece, so I would appreciate an opportunity to learn more about what that struggle and that challenge is, and happy to have my staff follow up with what we can do to assist.
I'd appreciate it, and hopefully we'll not have another pandemic with food lines around and around the blocks. But if we do, it would be wonderful if FEMA would participate side by side with other federal agencies rather than standing back. Thank you so very much, and we wish you good success in your job. Look forward to working with you, and we'll try to browbeat you very kindly. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I recognize Ms. Gonzalez Colon, I would point out that the administrator has to leave us at 4:15. She's going to the White House for a meeting. Since we want her to take all these concerns we have to the White House with her, we'll try to wrap it up by then. Ms. Gonzalez Colon.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Administrator, for being with us today, and also thank you for visiting Puerto Rico a few weeks ago. I was able to host you there for several meetings, and I got the direct impression that you know what you're doing, and you took notes on many of the issues on the island. So I appreciate that directly, and I want to say it as I said to you personally here in public. And one of the issues that we discussed at that meeting was that the issue of a clawback when there's an error in funding from FEMA to the agencies and actually to the people. And as last month, my office received several calls from constituents that had FEMA assistance approved for their home that was damaged in hurricanes in 2017. And they were recently called by FEMA in coordination with the IRS, informing them that the assistance was given in error, and they're seeking to claw back the funding. And this is something that we discussed, and this is not new for the committee. That was the reason we co-sponsor HR 539, the Preventing Disaster Rectification Act, introduced by Ranking Member Graves, that will require FEMA to waive the disaster assistance debts that FEMA provided to people in error. Do you think that is the agency forced to do this by current law or regulation, or this can be reevaluated by the administration?
Representative Gonzalez Colon, I just wanted to thank you for your time when I visited Puerto Rico. I appreciated the information and listening to the struggles and the challenges that your communities are facing out there. First, on the clawback issue, I wanted to point out that we are currently using the waiver authority that current law has, that Congress provided to us through the DRRA, to waive some of those clawbacks when it is an error on FEMA's part. But with this one that you're talking about now, I'd really appreciate the opportunity for my team to learn more about this particular situation so we can better understand it. But I also understand that there is legislation that's being drafted, and my team stands ready to assist Congress with technical drafting assistance so we can effectively address this issue so we don't have this problem in the future.
Thank you. HR 539 is already approved by the House. So it's en route to the Senate, and I think it's a good piece of legislation. The other question I do have is regarding the Build Back Better. You know that in Congress, Congressman Serrano and myself put an amendment to Section 2601 in the 2018 Bipartisan Budget Act that allowed the agency to be flexible in regards to pre-disaster condition, which is one of the main issues on the island. To instead rebuild to current industry standards. And the reason we want to rebuild to the current code is so in the next storm it is more resilient, and so we don't have to spend more money again and again to rebuild or replace structure multiple times when we can be up to date in the codes. For the first years after the hurricanes in 2017, there were repeated complaints from the municipalities and the state government in spite of many occasions, projects that were in such a way to only fix that was broken by the storm, even though meeting new codes require many of the other parts of the site to be upgraded. Do you think this is still a problem?
So building codes are so important. And, I've been talking with some communities that have been impacted recently by disasters. And they have shared with me the fact that when a community adopts stronger building codes, that what they're seeing is less impact from disasters. And so I think the first step is making sure that communities are adopting the current set of building codes. So as communities are rebuilding or building, that they're building to the new code. I think as far as when people are recovering, when communities are recovering and repairing or rebuilding the structures that have been damaged during a disaster and a presidentially declared disaster, again, FEMA does not have the authority to tell them what to build to unless it's to the current code. And we do provide additional mitigation funding so they don't have to build back just to the current, to the previous state, but they can incorporate some increased hardening and resiliency to make them stronger against future disasters.
Madam Secretary, I just want to say thank you to your office and all the FEMA employees on the island. They've been helping the island, more than 1,000 employees since 2017, so this is not new. I mean, they've been working there. We are right now in the hurricane season. We got earthquakes last 2 years, so I know FEMA got boots on the ground since 2017, and I hope we can continue to work together to have a more resilient Puerto Rico. So thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Thank you. Before I recognize Mr. Rouser, I'd like to ask you, Administrator, we talked about this earlier, and you mentioned it in your opening remarks, how important it is to get the best workforce possible to deal with some of these disasters. And I wonder if, given your experience with the National Guard, what you think about providing USERRA-like protections to Americans who want to go and be helpful, but they can't because they won't have their jobs when they come back home. And do you think that's something that we could work on together to help you build that better workforce?
I think it's an important point. I spent 21 years in the Air National Guard, and having USERRA protection allowed me to support the duty to my nation and know that I had a job when I came back. And you're right, it's not a protection that we currently have for the largest part of our workforce, which is our reservist workforce. So I would appreciate the opportunity to continue to work with you on whether or not we can make that a reality for the FEMA reservist workforce.
Great. Well, I look forward to that too. Mr. Rouser?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Madam Administrator. Congratulations on your new post, your new assignment, and I know you'll do great. I want to follow up on some of the comments of my colleagues made previously, and I have similar issues, obviously, in my district. All of us that deal with hurricanes and floods and natural disasters, it seems like on an annual basis, seem to have the same problems. Obviously, there are two towns in particular I want to highlight and I want to mention, and if you don't mind, if you can help me out with these two in terms of getting their reimbursement. It's been mentioned, I heard mention about small counties, when these small towns too, when they're putting up millions of dollars, 10, 14, $20 million, whatever it is, and they're set to be reimbursed, through the public assistance program from FEMA, but they don't get the reimbursement for a year or more. I know when Hurricane Matthew hit in 2016, I had some communities that didn't get reimbursed for a long, long time. Our North Carolina DOT was not reimbursed for their expenditures for far more than a year, as I recall. And in this particular case with Hurricane Florence, the town of Surf City and the town of Topsail Beach, both of them are still waiting for pretty significant reimbursement. Town of Surf City, approximately $10.6 million, and the town of Topsail Beach, pretty significant sum as well. Would you mind looking into those two in particular? Both have waited more than a year. I believe they submitted their request March a year ago, and of course, obviously, that's been a little more than a year since then.
Absolutely. I don't obviously know the specifics of those two, but I'm happy to get the details and get back to your team and your staff with the status.
I appreciate that very much because when they don't get those reimbursements, it's very hard to plan and prepare for the next storm. And like I said, in 2016, we had Matthew, then 2018, we had Florence, and 2019 and 2020, we escaped disaster, but very, very narrowly. And I expect 2021 to make us a little nervous as well. Following up on one other issue for the town of Topsail Beach, they've submitted updated LiDAR data, but the revised firm maps don't reflect those updates at all, and it has some pretty substantial impact for more than 400 homes there. And the town makes a very, very good case that the data that was used for the original set of maps is just not accurate. In fact, really off. Would you mind checking into that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm not familiar with the specifics, but I will have my team get back to you with what the status is of that.
That would be great. And then one question for me, just to help me understand. You've got risk rating 2.0 that was mentioned previously by a colleague that I happened to hear his question. And how does that overlay with, you're supposed to have these new flood maps every 5 to 7 years, and it takes forever to get them done. And then here you got risk rating 2.0 that's set to go in effect. Is that just going to override the preliminary flood maps when you get those finalized, or how is that going to work? I'd just like to know from an educational standpoint.
Yeah, I do not believe that it overrides. Risk rating 2.0 is really looking at the individual risk for each person's home. And the flood maps are a part of that, but it goes into other pieces of the risk related to their home as well. But we can certainly get a better definition and clarification for you so you understand how the two interrelate.
Okay. Well, I've got more than 400 homes there on that particular beach that basically would not be eligible for flood insurance, and it's all based on faulty data. And I want to get whether it's risk rating 2.0 or whether it's the latest version of the flood maps that directly affects them. I'd like to make sure that at least those who are putting in place these policies know what the correct data is.
Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Administrator. You've been very helpful and very patient. Mr. Webster, any final remarks?
What a great meeting.
All right, I will then conclude our hearing and like to thank you again for your testimony. It's been very informative, helpful to us as we do policy and try to provide you the resources that you need to get the job done. I'll ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witness has provided answers to any questions that may have been submitted. I'll also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. The subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you. Okay, great.